How's it going, Laser Bruces? I'm Bobby Sixkilla, and today we're going to be taking a look at Heaven's Vault. But rather than a let's play or impression, we're going to first do a review of the game and all its elements. Once that's done, we'll be jumping into spoiler territory and taking an in-depth look at the story, endings, and the basic timeline. But don't worry, if you're planning to play it for yourself, I'll be putting up a big warning when we'll be entering spoiler territory. In a universe consisting of moons and a nebula that is connected by rivers composed of oxygen, hydrogen and ice, navigable by ships, and where the primary belief is that of the Great Loop, a belief that all that has happened before will happen again and again for eternity. You take control of Alia Elasra, an archaeologist living on Iox, the cultural and economical hub of the nebula, and home of the great University of Iox. You are tasked with finding a robotics professor who has gone missing after discovering something that may change everything. As far as visuals go, the character animations are extremely bare bones, with the game featuring 2D sprites for characters, but also fully rendered 3D environments that are usually immersive and occasionally stunning. You spend a lot of time hopping from moon to moon, and the use of colours and textures in the environments really lends a sense of atmosphere and gives you the feeling of the kind of place you're in and who the inhabitants may have been. There is little music in the game, but it chips in beautifully to help lend that sense of anticipation and awe when visiting new locations and at other key moments. If I had any real complaints with the game, it would be that there are often very long stretches of silence, which really starts weighing on you after a while. The main character is voice acted as a sort of narrator during key moments, and what little there is of it is fantastic.
And everywhere I looked, things were growing from the mud. And some of those things had legs.
There are three main mechanics through which you engage with the game's primary loop. The first you'll be introduced to will be conversation. The game has a conversation tree system allowing you to respond in a variety of ways depending on how you're feeling. The timing, context, and flow of the conversation can have large effects on what happens in-game. Conversation also plays a large part in getting leads on new dig sites for progressing the story. The next mechanic you'll encounter soon after is the translation of an ancient language simply referred to as Ancient, in which you will attempt to decode phrases, fragments of text, or simply words, using what you've learned so far as hints to what some new collection of glyphs may mean. It often ends with you entering your best guesses and cross-referencing later against other inscriptions using the same glyphs to slowly and organically expand your vocabulary so that the game can throw larger and more complex phrases at you as you further progress. Finally, you'll spend time sailing the rivers, which consists of turning your ship onto the correct rivers at junctions and following directions. There are also times you'll discover mini ruins on your travels, which your robot will hopper, teleport down to recover any artifacts there. This is easily the weakest moment during gameplay, and while the environments are absolutely gorgeous while sailing the nebula, it can get frustrating and repetitive. Fortunately, there is a mechanic where any time you are traversing rivers you're familiar with, your robot, Six, can take control and it will transition to the next location or next portion of uncharted waters along the way. Story is where the meat of the game is, so let's get into a spoiler-free expansion of the premise. So as I said previously, this universe consists of a nebula scattered with moons with rivers of oxygen, hydrogen and ice running through space to allow ship travel. Inhabited moons fall under the Iox Protectorate, with Iox standing at the centre of the nebula and previous seat of the Holy Ioxian Empire's Emperor before the fall. The main religion is that of the Loop, where the belief is that all has happened before and will happen again and again for eternity in a big cycle. The nebula has an extreme wealth deficit, with Iox controlling the majority of the wealth and water and collecting taxes from the poorer moons falling into the Protectorate. No moon is poorer than that of Alberith, a desert moon consisting of a large market and crowded slums, and the birthplace of our protagonist, Alia, who was raised in an orphanage and, before the start of the game, was taken into custody by Professor Mayari, the head of the University of Iox. Alia was taken to live on Iox and trained to behave like a proper Ioxian, after which she became an archaeologist. As the game opens after the title screen, our protagonist Alia is on Iox and is confronted by a robot informing her that Professor Mayari has called for her immediately. When she enters Mayari's room, Mayari shows Alia a brooch adorned with the eagle and sun emblem of the Holy Ioxian Empire, after which Mayari explains that one of the professors, Yarniki Renba, had found it and sent it to her and then promptly disappeared. Mayari then tasks you with finding him urgently and also insists that you take the robot, which Alia named Six, with her. It becomes obvious fairly quickly that Alia has some pretty serious doubts about everyone's belief in the loop, as it is basically in total opposition to the profession of archaeologist, as those who believe in the loop do not believe in history. It also becomes clear that Alia does not entirely trust Professor Mayari, who is clearly hiding things from her, and possibly everyone. Following this, the game opens up and you begin the game's primary loop, consisting of travelling, finding artifacts that may point you to new locations, and translating text to learn more about the history of the nebula. At this point, the game becomes completely non-linear, allowing numerous ways to achieve your goals. I did 2 complete playthroughs, as the game has 2 different endings, and I ended up achieving my goals in totally different ways each time, and not even on purpose. I would say that the single playthrough takes 8 to 10 hours, but as the game features a New Game Plus mode that allows you to bring over all the ancient words in your vocabulary to your new game, as well as a second ending, there is enough replayability for a second playthrough. That concludes the review portion of the video. From here on, there be spoilers. You have been warned. Now, there are many things you can encounter on your journey, as the sites you visit all vary, so this section will mainly follow the main story path. As you travel from place to place in Renba's shadow, you come across a supposedly uninhabited moon in a dangerous area of space known as the Cyclones. But as you explore, you discover a damaged building containing many artifacts that hint to what Renba may have been looking for, including a crown adorned with the same sun and eagle motif as the brooch found by Renba, which Alia quickly identifies as the crown of Iox. On further exploration, you find the smouldering remains of a crashed ship, and it becomes apparent that the ship belonged to Renba, who was using combustible fuel to pilot his ship to places that would be otherwise inaccessible. After concluding that Renba must have died in the explosion that destroyed his ship, Alia and Six prepare to depart the moon by hopper, teleport, when something goes wrong and they are hoppered into a hitherto unknown cave, at which point some memory or fragment of Renba speaks to Alia through Six, thinking that you are Professor Mayari, as Mayari is the robot's primary user. In the communication from Renba, it is inferred that Professor Mayari is not who she claims to be, and that in their cause the robots know everything, and that a great darkness is coming. He tells of an ancient observatory that is the key to combating the coming darkness. Eventually, after tracking a whole bunch of artifacts, you find yourself on an unknown forest moon with one of the gods' statues adorned upon a large hopper. So the way you discover this place was completely different on both my playthroughs, so I'll give you a short summary on how I got there both times. On my first go, I discovered a child in one of the ancient sites out in the middle of nowhere named Amir. Apparently he had said a forbidden word in front of the large gate on Alberith, which just happened to be a giant ancient intermoonitary hopper, and was teleported to the ruin as a toddler, where he had survived ever since. We decided to take him to the farming moon Myersi.
I led the boy up the muddy path from the ship. His little eyes kept popping out of his head. I thought he was going to lose them.
Where he can live and work, and we vow to come back and visit him.
We made our way back through the fields to the well. I kept expecting Amir to jump out at me, waving his stick about and yelling. But there was no sign of him at all.
When we do return to visit, the villagers are worried about him, as he's moved in with the pigs and started talking to them.
Amir was sitting in the pig yard with the pigs, looking dirtier than ever.
When we talk to Amir, he claims that the pigs talk to him. They say the word Ifarali, which when spoken to the gate on Alberith, hopper Alia to the unknown forest moon, whereas on my second run its position was inferred by the artifacts I'd examined on my path. After exploring the unknown forest moon, you realise that it is a sort of hub from which water is hoppered to Iox. After shutting down the hopper to Iox and repairing one of the hoppers that had fallen into disrepair, a new river forms in space to an unknown location. Alia and Six immediately depart and begin to traverse this new or newly recreated river of old. At the far end, Alia finds an old desolate desert moon and a large hill adorned with god statues and a ruin at the top.
We had followed a strange and winding road through the loneliest reaches of space. And on the moon at the end of the path was nothing.
The ruin is blocked up with bricks, and on the bricks are some more words that when translated read, "Do not enter heaven's vault," but directly under that sits a warning reading, "The seventh god will drink the nebula until all is dark." Upon smashing her way into the ruin, Alia discovers a huge metal facility full of robots and walkways, and at the center is the seventh god.
The The tomb was not a tomb. The mountain was not a mountain.
A ship who speaks to Alia through Six. The ship has been slowly absorbing all the water in the nebula to generate power for the vault, a process by which those aboard the ship will survive in a sort of exodus. The ship is unable to do anything because of a conflict in its ethical core. It cannot complete the vault autonomously because it will kill everyone in the nebula, but it also cannot cancel it autonomously as it believes it is the only way that existence can continue. Which brings us to complete her journey, Alia must make the decision for the ship, which gives one of two endings. Firstly, you can choose to vault, allowing the ship to finish draining the nebula, allowing Alia and Six to be the only survivors to continue existence.
Stories don't have tidy beginnings. The past is always present. But the past is just another story. One that we can always leave behind.
The second is much more interesting and satisfying, where Alia instructs the ship to shut down, after which all the water it had absorbed for power is sent back into the nebula, reviving long-lost waterways and reconnecting the whole nebula, and presumably giving those moons struggling to survive like Alberith an abundance of water and the ability to become prosperous.
Stories don't have tidy beginnings. The past is always present. But the past is just another story. How we tell that story, what it means, that's for us to decide.
Now there is so much to be found on your travels outside of the main story, much of which you only get snippets that you must speculate on, so for this next section please bear in mind that some of this is speculation that is not confirmed by the game. Also a huge shout out to those who put together a complete timeline on Google Docs, which I'll link below. Based on the AI at the core of Heaven's Vault being referred to as the seventh god, it would seem likely that at the beginning of recordable history, the ship entered the nebula full of new settlers and 7 AIs known as the Seven Gods, where they set up shop on the moon of Heaven's Vault. After about 1300 years of closed-off life, the settlers sealed up Heaven's Vault and began to colonize the nebula. After another 200 years, the settlers used the hopper technology to build a water network to share water between moons, allowing for further expansion. Next came the Age of Sail, where huge ships were constructed for possibly mercantile purposes. At the same time, the Citadel on Elbereth began construction. During this time, the upriver was built on the Serpent's Eye, designed to use propulsion to launch ships quickly across the nebula, using iolite crystals to manipulate gravity for easier liftoff. After which was the time of the Steel Empire, in which robots ruled. During this time, they established the monitoring station on the Serpent's Eye, and took at least some humans as slaves for menial labor, such as mining in the mining camps on Sculptor's Moon. What they were mining on Sculptor's Moon is unknown, but it has been speculated to be quantium, the metal that was used to build robots, hoppers, and the facility on Serpent's Eye. Around 150 years after the robots took over the mining camp, it would appear that the humans revolted, driving the robots off Sculptor's Moon, who abandoned the humans there, and we'll be returning to them later. Finally, the Steel Empire fell when a person by the name of Enkei somehow discovered the control words that allowed manipulation of the robots, and used them to crush the Steel Empire. She became the first Empress, and the Holy Ioxian Empire was born. 8 years later, the followers of Enkei discovered the Hopper source on the Forest Moon, and the Empire began to repurpose hoppers to transmit only the mental mesh, allowing it to store human knowledge and personalities inside robots. After 2 more years, the Hopper's source was relocated to the site of the soon-to-be Withering Palace. 7 years later, the Withering Palace was constructed to house the Empire's collective knowledge, and where the robots are buried beneath the palace after having their memories wiped. 13 years after the construction of the Withering Palace, Enkei is named a god, and soon begins to destroy the ancient language and knowledge. Eventually, the emperors began to use the modified hoppers to store their knowledge and personalities in robesque foils and robots beneath the palace. Now back to the miners that were abandoned on Sculptor's Moon by the robots. They eventually found a god buried deep in the mine, which then hoppers the remaining people to the Withering Palace, where they help free the robots buried underground, including the first empress, Enkei, who had been transmitted into a robot. Enkei led the rebellion of miners and robots against the Holy Ioxian Empire, finally bringing about the fall of the Empire. Those who rebelled and destroyed the Empire are known as Fallers, and are the descendants of all contemporary Ioxians. After storming the Emperor's palace, the Fallers quickly established power on Iox. This was known as the Dark Age, and during this 150-year stint, the University of Iox, the Loop Temple in its modern form, and the Iox Protectorate, at the time only including Iox and Elbereth, are established. And this brings us to the modern age, consisting of the main character's births, Professor Mayari taking control of Iox, and the events of the game. So while there is indeed so much more to talk about, I want to try and keep this as succinct as possible with the events that I feel are the most important to understanding the timeline. And with that, we've come to the end of the video. If it's not obvious already, I highly recommend Heaven's Vault, and even if you're watching this last part without having played the game first, there's definitely still plenty to see in there that we haven't even touched on, so yeah, go play it. If you like this video, please like and share it so I know that this is the kind of video you want to see more of, as it obviously takes a lot more work than my usual. And with that, thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you in the next one.